Have you ever entered a room and immediately sensed someone confidently, perhaps too confidently, spouting a series of impressive sounding jargon? Words flowing like a river in a torrential downpour, yet upon closer examination, they seem to prioritize style over substance. In social realms, we often encounter such individuals who are often labeled as pseudo-intellectuals. But what exactly do we mean by pseudo-intellectual? Lexically, pseudo means false or pretend, while intellectual refers to intellectual activities, serious and deep learning and reasoning. Thus, pseudo-intellectualism is an atmosphere created by someone attempting to be seen as intellectual without a strong enough foundation to support it. They may be able to quote Plato to Picasso, but without a full grasp of the meaning behind what they're quoting. Our challenge now is to deconstruct this persona without falling into the same trap. With critical eyes, we will investigate whether what appears as stated is indeed true, or perhaps it's merely the illusion of intellectual musings. We must be wary of theories without real practice, ideas that bubble without deep roots and contemplation to support them. It must be acknowledged that identifying a pseudo-intellectual can be as complex and confusing as understanding the topics they like to lecture about. Advanced economics, metaphysical philosophy, even quantum theory. Their verbose discourse sometimes adds fog to the clarity of substance. However, intriguingly, the pseudo-intellectual often exerts a unique allure. They strike chords resonating with the natural human desire to be admired for intellectual richness, albeit through rhetorical shortcuts. The investigation we undertake is not to ridicule but to understand. How does an individual evolve into a fan of style over content? How does society mediate and respond to such phenomena? And what are the impacts on our collective knowledge, discourse, and learning? With deep curiosity, we will navigate this maze of artificial intelligence, seeking answers to whether the pseudo-intellectual is merely a victim of an information-rich and superficial era, or perhaps a cunning actor of intellectual illusion. Ultimately, our introspection about this pseudo-intellectual personality may highlight more about our social condition than we expect. This phenomenon is not only about a lack of knowledge, but also about how someone presents it in a misleading way, often to seek social validation or cover up their insecurities. And the main causes are: 1. Social validation need. The digital era has given birth to an instant culture where information spreads quickly and often without filtering. Pseudo-intellectuals exploit this phenomenon to seek validation. They often opine on complex topics on social media platforms or public discussions without sufficient knowledge, expecting validation through likes, shares, and comments. 2. Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a psychological phenomenon where individuals with low expertise tend to overestimate their abilities. People with little knowledge often exhibit overconfidence, while those who are truly competent tend to underestimate their abilities. Pseudo-intellectuals may not realize their limitations and thus speak with unfounded confidence. 3. Education and background. One may grow up in an environment that emphasizes intellectual appearances more than actual pursuit of knowledge. This leads to the cultivation of a weak academic facade. Much talk, little substance. It is also driven by educational institutions that prioritize grades over critical thinking skills. 4. Desire for dominance. In discussions, some people have a deep desire to dominate or appear intellectually superior. They use complex vocabulary and speak with fake authority to create an impression of intellect, while actually masking their lack of real knowledge. 5. Lack of introspection. The pseudo-intellectual personality often arises from a lack of introspection and self-reflection. This results in a lack of awareness of their own knowledge limitations, and a lack of drive to truly understand or question the discussion topics. This personality negatively impacts intellectual discourse in various ways, such as spreading misleading information, degrading substantive debates, and hindering collective learning. Pseudo-intellectual behavior can lower the standards of public discourse and foster a cynical attitude towards true experts, as well as undermine public trust in facts and scientific analysis. Identifying and criticizing pseudo-intellectual individuals requires an analytical approach. First and foremost, listen carefully to what is being said and assess whether they are using genuine knowledge or just empty rhetoric. Analyze their arguments and compare them with reliable sources. It is also important to acknowledge one's own knowledge limitations. Be open to learning more and not be afraid to ask questions. In analyzing the phenomenon of pseudo-intellectualism, one must understand that while someone may behave as an intellectual, critical thinking and ongoing self-education are the only ways to overcome it. Society and the education system should emphasize the importance of critical thinking and healthy debate ethics to reduce the prevalence of pseudo-intellectual behavior. Here are the signs that may indicate a pseudo-intellectual personality. 1. Excessive use of jargon. Often, someone with a pseudo-intellectual mindset tries to impress with the use of technical or philosophical terms in inappropriate contexts or without sufficient understanding, aiming to build their image of intelligence. 2. Substance-less arguments. They tend to present arguments that sound convincing on the surface but, when analyzed deeper, lack concrete evidence, coherent logic, or true understanding of the topic. 3. Rejection of criticism. Reluctance to accept criticism or challenges to their views is often characteristic. Instead of acknowledging mistakes or knowledge gaps, they tend to defend their positions defensively. 4. Quoting sources without context. They may often quote thoughts or theories from famous figures without understanding the context or full application of those theories, showing an effort to appear knowledgeable rather than conveying authentic thoughts. 5. Self-centeredness. There is a tendency to make themselves the center of every intellectual discussion, often by emphasizing their own opinions as the most important or most correct. 6. Preference for style over substance. Their rhetorical style often aims more to confuse than to elucidate, to cover up the lack of substance. 7. Inflexibility. There is an inability or unwillingness to shift from existing perspectives even when presented with contradictory or stronger new information. 8. Superficial knowledge. Although appearing broad, their knowledge is often shallow, lacking much deep understanding or analytical ability in a field. 9. Tendency to avoid. When confronted with technical details or specific questions, a pseudo-intellectual tends to evade with vague answers or revert to general points. To respond to pseudo-intellectual traits, a critical and intellectual discipline approach must be maintained. Direct confrontation may reinforce defensive attitudes, but gentle strategies while remaining explicit in demanding clarification and evidence can effectively expose the emptiness of their arguments and encourage more meaningful discussions. The impact of this phenomenon is nested in several layers, both within the pseudo-intellectual themselves and their social environment. Firstly, on a personal level, pseudo-intellectual personality can trigger the formation of a fragile identity. An identity based on inauthentic knowledge is vulnerable to criticism and tends to be unable to withstand contradictory perspectives. Dependence on external validation creates individuals often incapable of introspection or accepting constructive criticism, thus hindering genuine intellectual growth. Secondly, in the context of social interaction, pseudo-intellectualism influences power dynamics. Individuals who emit a know-it-all aura, though in reality it's hollow, often positioned at higher social levels. This often occurs in discussions, where those vocal and appearing smart tend to dominate, even though the arguments presented are shallow. This phenomenon weakens public discourse by distorting the value of truth and the depth of genuine thought. Thirdly, On a broader scale, pseudo-intellectualism can result in the spread of misinformation and the formation of misguided public opinions. In an era of fast and easily accessible information like today, individuals' ability to filter information becomes crucial. However, pseudo-intellectual personality often prioritizes speed and sensation over truth and depth of analysis. This drives the creation of fragile information bubbles that are safe for unfounded beliefs, ultimately creating social vulnerabilities to misinformation and manipulation. Fourthly, pseudo-intellectualism can crystallize into a mindset of intellectual elitism that undermines the egalitarian principle in knowledge. These individuals often belittle alternative perspectives that may come from less prestigious sources, even though those perspectives have substantial value. This condition fosters the formation of echo chamber groups, where members feel superior and impervious to external arguments that could threaten their fragile intellectual oasis. Overall, the impact of pseudo-intellectual personality on contemporary society is multifaceted. From individual psychology to larger social schemes, the illusion of intelligence played by pseudo-intellectuals can contaminate the pool of public knowledge and poison the process of healthy dialectics. It is important for individuals and society to develop critical skills, strengthen intellectual honesty, and always embrace diversity of perspectives as the foundation for collective intellectual progress. Concluding the exploration of the pseudo-intellectual personality, its conclusion should not be taken lightly. Pseudo-intellectuals reflect a longing for recognition in scientific and social communities, yet often without a solid foundation of understanding or intellectual honesty. This phenomenon is not just a lifestyle choice, but can also be a reflection of an education system that fails to instill the value of critical thinking, as well as a tendency in social media to reward popularity over substance. Fighting this symptom is not about isolating them, but about taking proactive steps in education, encouraging substantive dialogue, and fostering awareness of better information literacy. Our collective responsibility is to guide public discourse back to the rails of credibility and authenticity, thus shedding light for those lost in the labyrinth of pseudo-intellectualism to return to the path of true and deep understanding. Hope this helps. Goodbye. Thank you.